Oh, shit.
What is going on, guys? I thank you all for joining me, and today we're going to go over how to turn this pile of parts back into a fully operational, properly functioning Shimano Super Stopper Antireverse clutch mechanism. Now, it's important to note that when you're dealing with the core protected version, which is this one here, if you look closely, it kind of has almost a spray adhesive type coating on it. That's the Core Protect hydrophobic coating. You don't want to touch that with your fingers or anything metal because you can kind of rub that coating off and then water's not going to bead up. And on the X protected version, the underside of that top plate and the top side of that retaining ring also has a hydrophobic coating. You don't want to have your fingers contacting that as well. In addition to that, you want to make sure that you have your size 0 Phillips at the ready and a non-magnetized tool with a narrow enough tip that you can kind of get in and maneuver the little cylinders around once you lie them in place, because sometimes they don't go where you want them to go and you kind of got to give them a nudge. And if it's magnetized, you're going to be moving them around and pulling them away from where you're trying to get them to go in the first place. Now, with that being said, what you want to start off by doing is take an inventory of what you have versus what you need. And for this, you need 6 of these little springs, and here they are up close. And you're also going to need 6 of the cylinders. And it's important to know what you need versus what you have, because you don't want to get too far along and realize that, whoops, you got to go on a hunt now for for loose parts. And if you do have everything you need, you don't want to go on a wild goose chase trying to find stuff that you already had sitting in front of you. Now, in addition to the springs and cylinders, you're going to need for the core protected unit the smaller inner ring, the metal cage, the top cap, and the screw that fits everything together. And you're going to need the top ring with the 3 longer screws that bolt it down into the frame. You're also going to need the Core Protect seal, the AR clutch sleeve, the rotor cup. And for the X protected unit, instead of this, and this, you have this, a washer, and this top ring instead. Now, as long as your inventory matches mine, we're now ready for the extreme close-up, and we're ready to proceed with the reassembly. And for step 1, we're going to take these 2 pieces here, we're going to flip this one over, we're going to locate that notch. This notch has to be exposed through that little semicircle out the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and place it in just like so, and you'll see that little notch can only turn so much. And if this little inner piece doesn't want to play nice and get seated all the way, it's probably because if you look at this little post on the inside, this little post, that little post, and this one here around that inner perimeter, it's probably getting hung up on that. So once you have that installed, you're now ready for step 2, which is the installation of the springs. Now, starting off, when you're dealing with these individual springs, you might find it's best to work with it on the table, so that way you're not dealing with any additional gravity. Because if you drop these springs, they can bounce. And what you're going to do, if you saw what I just did there, I installed them with that little leg facing the outside on the top and the long leg on the inside. Now, it's important to note that you want to make sure that the long leg is in between its respective slot, because you're going to put the cylinders in there, and if you have the legs of the spring installed so that they kind of go into the wrong slot, you won't be able to open and close them. See that right there? It's kind of hung up. You don't want that. You want to make sure that they're in their respective slot. You're just going to work your way around. Just like so. Now, for the next step, after those springs are all in place, you're going to open the doors. So if you see the small leg, I'm kind of pushing it so it rotates that longer leg. I always find that's easiest for when you're getting to this part. And it also kind of confirms whether or not they're all in the proper slot. Now for the next step, you're going to take this retaining cage, and you're going to see that here on the side that has a dimple, the edge here is kind of rounded off, where the top side is more of a sharper edge or less broken. And you'll also note that the ears that protrude out around the perimeter are of different spacing. You want to take the ears that are closest together and find the ears that are closest together around the perimeter. So the closest two ears are right here and here. And then we're going to take it dimple side down, or rounded edge down, and gently place that ring in like so. That's pretty much the trickiest part, that you have to kind of make sure you do it 100%. Otherwise, you might be backtracking a little bit because you can accidentally drop something. And once you have that in place, you can take your cylinders and gently place them around. And this is where you may need to grab your non-magnetized tool to get them to go into place. Now for me personally, it's easier for me to install the cylinders while I'm holding it up in the air versus what you might see on camera, because the camera's perfectly top down. You can see I'm trying to hold it in a perspective that the camera sees it versus what might be easier for me to see. So I'm kind of going in a little bit blindly. Come on. And again, you have to have those spring doors open. And that is the final one. Now once you have all the cylinders in place, go ahead and close the doors of the springs gently. And that'll kind of keep the cylinders a little bit in place, I guess is the best way to put it. And if you remember where you had the two ears that were closest together, right around 12 o'clock, you want to kind of situate the little tabs on, see these ears on the top here, like so. I'm going to go ahead and align that up. And supporting it from the bottom, we're going to rotate it in place. And you'll see, if you did it right, you'll have these three holes clean through, and the one hole here, which is going to be for this screw right there. And then we're going to gently snug that down. So at this point, go ahead and drop your AR clutch sleeve in, your core protect. Again, you don't want to touch that with your bare fingers. You don't want to disrupt. And you want to put this ring back in place. Sometimes it's easier to do with just the individual screws one by one. And then that little rotor cup. You're also going to make sure when you grab your reel, I'm going to zoom out a little bit, that the O-ring is in place, that bearing is seated. And we're going to locate that little stud right there, because this little stud right here is going to go right there in that little notch. And if you didn't see, there's also two little posts on the base that are going to go into the reel's frame, like so. And since some things moved a little bit, There we go. Now we're going to go ahead and gently screw these top cap screws down. We're going to go very, very semi-snug. And it's important to note when you're kind of screwing down into this CI4 Plus material, you don't want to kind of rethread a new hole every time. So you want to kind of rotate it back, and it should go in very gently and very easily. So now we have it so all 3 screws are very lightly snugged, and then we're going to go back around and lightly snug them down again. Our goal to compress that O-ring. And then one last time, again, we're not putting tons of pressure on these screws. They just don't need it. They just want to be snug so that they grab and they don't back out at all. And I'm going to make sure that one's snug down. We're going to put that rotor cup back in place. We can now place the rotor on top. The rotor retaining nut. Tighten that up. Place your seal in place. And then you have your rotor nut retainer, and then you're done. So pretty much it's a fairly simple and straightforward little operation. It's not too involved. There are a lot of pieces, and yeah, it can be a little frustrating if you accidentally dumped it on the table, because you now have to spend 15-20 minutes figuring out where the parts went and where they need to go. But for the most part, it's not all that tricky, and you really can't break anything. It's not like if you reinstall it, you're going to blow out a gear set or anything like that if you don't install it properly. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Thanks for coming by. Make sure you hit that like button if you found it helpful. And if you're not already a subscriber, please check out some of the other content that I've put out in the past and subscribe. Until next time, guys, tight lines, and I shall see you soon.